And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful Thursday evening. As you join us once again for the Saboteurs, this is episode 3. That is, hang on, that's that arranged. There we go, 3. Episode 3, and we're here to talk to players, to reveal about their characters who refuse to follow those wonderful plans that their hard-working, long-suffering dungeon masters have put together for them, and the players come in and do whatever the fuck they want because hey, that's players, isn't it? So this week I'm going to be talking to a lovely little chaotic soul, one of my closest friends, and somebody that I've played with for a very, very long time. And this is somebody that's been played a rogue, chaotic again. We're also going to be talking about some druids. Unfortunately, all of them are dead. So please give a lovely Sabotage DM welcome to Mr. Jon Cooper. Hello, my friend.
Ah, General Kenobi, how you
General,
doing?
and the nerddom starts now.
Gotta get it straight out of the gate. We're gonna go.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for having me on, Joe. Really excited
Oh no,
to chat about some of this.
it's so good to have you back on here because of course you did the Jack's Funhouse a while ago now. How long ago was Jack's Funhouse?
God, well, I mean, that was like early doors pandemic time when we were all trying to find things to entertain ourselves with.
That's the
So,
one.
yeah, it feels that's probably about 4 or 5 months ago now.
God.
I'm hoping actually that we can get one in again soon, but you and I should chat about
Exclusive.
that.
Spoiler alerts.
We shall
Uh,
see. We shall see.
and as usual, we will be joining by different people. So if you are on the chat, do say hello. Hello,
Yeah,
Evan.
good to
Heavens
see you.
Bevans. Lovely to see
Hey,
you again.
Bevan, good to see you.
And Darren's here as well. Good to see Darren as well.
Hey!
So Darren Records here. So good to see everybody. If you are here, do say hello. Do have a chat, and we'll keep going as we can. There's a little bit of little admin I've got to do before we start though. We recently picked up affiliate status on Twitch. So which is whoop, whoop.
That's
So
amazing.
if you do enjoy what you see here on Subtitled DM, do subscribe to us. Do help us out. We're trying to get some new equipment for the players, but also trying to find some illustrators so that we can pay for some original artwork and of course get some licenses for music as well. So that will just totally help us out. So if you want to, you can click on our subscribe button. And if you do have a Amazon Prime account, you can get good old Jeff to give us some money instead by using your Amazon Prime account. It will cost you nothing. So do pop onto there and support us. So now that's out of the way. God, I hate saying shit. It's fucking horrible. So so
Oh,
you
dear.
and I have been
Mhm.
playing for a long time.
This is a shared history, Joe.
It is a shared
Really.
history.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
coming on the podcast, it's an opportunity to actually talk about how many games I've played with you, both as a DM,
Hmm.
as yeah, the benevolent DM that you have been for us, at the same time as oh my days, the number of games that we played together. I mean, it's your fault that I got into this.
I know. Welcome. But we were playing games way before that. We were playing a lot of more theatre games and pervasive
Yeah, yeah.
games. As you have made a lot of artwork, and you're a writer as well.
Mhm. Yeah, correct.
So all of this kind of adds together into sort of DM and Dungeons and Dragons. You liked it before you even knew you liked it. It's
Well,
true.
I remember hearing about it from a friend at university. And you know when you hear other people's, if you play D&D, you enjoy other people's stories of D&D. And this friend, his name was Charlie Brasty, really lovely guy. He used to tell me about how much fun he had playing D&D. And he used to talk about they had this magic shoe that used to fly in randomly and hit people. And I was like, that game sounds really geeky. And with a guy, ginger hair and glasses, I don't need more geek in my life. So I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And then it wasn't until RP Haven, I suppose, that
Mm,
then yeah, kind of you convinced me to come down.
yeah, I mean, I'll be having. So it's for those who don't know, especially I think there's one in Lewisham, Archway, Stratford. There's one in Cardiff as well, actually.
Okay.
Role playing club. Been a fantastic resource for myself and my housemate Josh. And because John lives around the corner from us, I was like, hey, come down. And that was actually been brilliant. So if you are looking for a game, do support your local clubs for sure,
Mhm.
Z's. But you came down
It's
to play not a D&D game, was it?
That's true. We came down to play, I think what we affectionately refer to as Kids on Bikes,
Yeah,
which was DM'd by Darren. Fantastically DM'd by Darren. So its rule set was it's Tales from the Loop, isn't it?
yeah.
And the way in which Darren sort of tends to DM, or at least was DMing that particular game for us, it was like all mechanics out of the way, concentrate on story. And as someone coming into that game for the first time, or that first group, particularly like if you go to a club, and I know a lot of people, obviously, with the pandemic, we've had to shift to play online, but
Hmm.
actually, there is nothing that beats going to a club, and there's nothing that beats meeting people who are, some of whom are very strange,
Hmm.
uh, many of whom are absolutely wonderful, um, and all of whom share an enthusiasm to actually sit around a table and tell a story together. And I think that was the nicest thing, as we turned up and I met complete strangers that I knew you in the room. I was 50-50 about whether or not I was even going to go,
Mm.
because it's a bit like, oh, this is actually kind of intimidating, and particularly like you and I have stood up and we've done theatre conferences and talks and like all these sorts of things. But the idea of going into a room with five strangers, putting on a voice and playing a rule set that you'd never played before was so terrifying. Like developing characters and like trusting someone to tell a story with that you'd never met was just a bit on the edge. But I genuinely think it was one of the best decisions that I made at that point, and I'm so glad, because actually it helped my mental health enormously at that time.
Yeah, because you came
Um,
and joined us a couple of weeks into our campaign as well, wasn't it?
well, you'd done season one of
Yeah.
yours already, and then you'd started season two. And I think myself and a player that I've continued to play with throughout, called Ben, he also turned up on his first week. And so these character sheets were put in front of us, and I understood nothing about how to create a character, like how to roll up the stats. To be honest, I still don't. But we'll come to that later, I'm sure. Um, so you'll notice that there's a running tendency with me to never read rule books. I've literally requested the rules. Um, so I remember that rule sheet landing in front of me, and then yourself and Tom and Stu and Ben and us all sort of like sitting there and working it out with pencil and paper, and Darren being like, okay, and like you had to choose an archetype, I think it was. Um, and I remember looking at it and being like, that Darren was like, these are the archetypes that are left, and one of them I think was like cheerleader. And I remember thinking, I don't know anyone in this room. Do I want to pretend to be a cheerleader? That's going to be super weird, because all of these are like, they're young characters, aren't they? They're like early teens. They're sort of all struggling with their own identity at the same time as their place in the world, at the same time as the general growing pains, and then fighting big bad monsters. So it's a fantastic setup. And I was like, okay, I'll be an American cheerleader, which is where Stacey came from,
Yeah.
and it's probably one of my favorite characters of all time. Genuinely love playing it.
Yeah, so you kind of joined up with this one. And of course, that Stuart was there as well. Yep, so Stu from last week, and
Yep.
who we've all kind of continued playing with afterwards.
Mm.
And that kind of group has kind of continued on. And we continue playing with each other, which is fantastic. So
Forged
that's
in stone.
sorry.
Kind of forged in stone. Like, yeah, we've all kept kind of kicking around, and I hope we're going to pick up some games with Darren again really soon. Maybe some kids on bikes, or when pandemic stuff lifts, some more stuff. Yeah.
Mm. But I'd say if you're a little shy about role playing, Tales from the Loop is a good one to start with. It's D6, nothing else, which is
Yeah.
always good. um, but D&D wise, I mean, this kind of pattern started to emerge, right? If you just turning up and just cracking on with things.
I was chatting to one of my friends earlier, and I was like, what are the memorable bits in campaigns that you think I've done? Because I've got a terrible memory, so I rely on my friends sometimes to be like, oh yeah, you did this. And they started describing to me some of the stuff I would do beginning of every campaign I've ever done. I just go in and I murder people. Just for the sheer shits and giggles of it. Seemingly chaos is the driving force between me when I initially start with a character. Um, and yeah, I think that certainly happened with Farrow, and that certainly happened with not with Stacey. I think that certainly happened then with Erin as well, who's one of the more recent characters. But yeah,
Mhm.
always start with some chaos.
Yeah. So, I mean, chaos aside,
Hmm.
how do you kind of actually come up with the idea of the character? Is it a mechanics based thing, or is it like you look at pop culture, or is there like anything that kind of like what draws you towards kind of writing a particular type of character?
That's a really interesting question. I I think it comes from a combination of different things. Like the first is what what do I want to explore about myself? I think when I played Stacey for the first time, I got an opportunity to play something which I most certainly am not. I am not a 13-year-old teenage American cheerleader. Like, that is quite literally not what I am. And then being able to enter into that position. I had a brother in Ben. I
Mm.
remember experiencing that, and I was like, oh, so this is what a sibling relationship is like. And then I also remember being like, as a white middle class English man, I'm very like I'm aware of the types of privilege that I have, and like playing a teenage girl for the first time actually made me look at a lot of my early experiences and the way in which I perceive the world slightly differently. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it gave me such extraordinary perspective, but it did stand something about someone else's, or at least a very hyper real version of another person's perspective. And I thought that was really engaging. And from that point onwards, when choosing characters, I wanted to be able to make something that was going to be challenging to me, not statistically or mathematically, but certainly in being how would I play that. And like the other thing, and I think this is a thing that comes from theatre at the same time as also comes from role playing, and definitely whenever I've played games with other people so frequently choose a character whose actions are hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it difficult as another player with them, because really frequently what you'll have happen is that they've got a big dark secret that they're holding on to, and they're waiting to reveal it later in the campaign. And when they land, they can be brilliant. But if you're willing to wait for 10 games and your character is just going to sit back and be cool or wait for their exposition point to appear, then it can actually like stifle the excitement and driving force of the party. So one of the things that I've always tried to do is to choose a character that's going to do something active from the very beginning, sometimes hugely detrimentally. And there's been a lot of playing around with that.
Mm.
Um, an interesting example of that would probably be Errant Ember in a campaign that is wonderfully run by Stu. It was called Aftermath. Errant met the basically the very close partner of one of our other players, Ben. Um, didn't get the information that she needed and slit her throat and threw her into a fountain. Um, I didn't realize that this was Ben's sort of partner character, like the close NPC that he has. So this character was around for the rest of the campaign, and I'm then sat there on this secret, being like, "Oh God," because they didn't. I'd hidden my face using minor illusion or whatever. I can't face changing or shape changing or whatever it is, um, and so I'm waiting for that secret to come out. So by making a completely insane choice quite early on, I'd kind of stitched myself into a corner with it. But because it was an active choice, it always meant that there was something to be hiding moving forwards. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. I'm trying to avoid it, but at the same time, I want to get close to the party because in that way, once I've realised I'm in with them, I need to get them to forgive me. So all of a sudden, there's a driving force of action rather than being a character that just sits back and coolly waits for their reveal. And I found quite a lot of players do that. They're
Yeah.
considered, or they've got sort of mental, they want to explore mental conditions, or like, uh, there's been a thing about backstory recently. I know I sort of started having this conversation with you a few
Yes.
days
Yeah.
ago, and we
Yeah.
were like,
Yeah.
oh, let's save this for the conversation. Um, so I've started changing the way in which I look at the idea of backstory recently because it's hard baked into D&D. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the character sheets, like what are your flaws? What's your backstory? Where are you from? Which archetype are you going to be? And I'm starting to pose the question in my own head, at least, is that necessarily useful? If you are coming into D&D and you're playing a level one character,
Mm-hmm.
level one characters don't have a hugely vengeful backstory. Really, they're unlikely to. Very few. I mean, they could be much older, but they're unlikely to have. They could have gotten into a few different scrapes. They could have upset some people, but it's unlikely that a god is something that they've upset in some huge way that it's now hunting them down. Like there's a there's a driving force that people come into with a lot of these characters in the backstory sense where they've hard baked everything in
Mm-hmm.
already and they know what their arc is and then they're just trying to achieve their arc. And again, sometimes it can come across in play that they're out for trying to finalize and finish that. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it definitely serves a purpose in that if you're new to it or you've never written anything like this before or you've never played in this sort of way, of course that's a useful structure to have in place. But I do wonder as well whether or not it's interesting for people to try turning up without one or
Mm.
structuring something that's between the two, which is kind of the approach that I'm trying to do at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think I do find that interesting. I mean, I know it's something that Sly Flourish talks about a lot. Um, anyone who's a struggling DM, by the way, if you're looking at a module, look at Sly Flourish at any point. Absolutely brilliant. But something that they say is about a barbarian that turns up who's had their heart broken so many times that they now have a cold stone where their heart should be and will never love again, means that there's no character arc.
Yeah.
However, if you word it slightly differently, of this is a barbarian who had their heart broken so many times they're now struggling to know how to love. You've then got to drive, and I think it's the phrasing of those things. I think there is something though. I'm going to disagree with you slightly
Good.
of this
Brilliant.
thing about like level 1 characters. They've done something that's made them special, something that's made them more than average, right? So having a tiny thing that kind of can flick through.
Yes.
But I do agree with you that kind of, was it the brooding sorcerer paladin who turns up, who's here to kill stuff and to gain glory. I know, it's like, come on, there's more that can be there. So for you then, taking that kind of lack of backstory, as it were, you like the kind of chaotic freedom to be able to kind of respond a bit more. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think there's a step between the two, and I think it's also that you don't necessarily need to turn up to a game of D&D with a 10-page backstory. You can turn up with a good hook. And that in and of itself can be enough, because in many respects, so there's two different approaches. One which is to talk about Farrow, I suppose, more directly, which was you were running Princess of the Apocalypse for us. If you care about spoilers, it's still going. How long have we been playing that game for now? We've been back and forth on it.
3 years.
3 years, about 3 years. It's one of those, yeah, just like so much stuff got in the way. Everyone got busy at different points, and we've been pushing it through, but by the same degree, it's taken us a good 3 years to get. And I think initially, like with Farrow, I came into it with a slightly different approach, and then with another couple of characters, I'm coming into it, so that it's kind of formed and changed as it's gone on. But let's look at Farrow for a second. So Farrow was really interesting because I knew rogue, gnome, lust for gold, and then you asked us for something that was really interesting, which was
let's have a look at him. Actually,
bring him up.
There he is. Farrow. There he is.
Beautiful. Haven't seen that portrait in too long.
I know, right?
So I remember you at the beginning of one of the sessions, you did something which both actually changed my playstyle as a DM at the same time as I just thought was beautiful. You asked us to tell each other dreams before the campaign began. And they were like snatches of the backstory that allowed players to understand something about each other, but it didn't give too much information away. It just kind of intrigued you enough about each other's characters that you were sort of sat around there being like, oh, interesting, I want to see where all of this goes. And with Farrow, it just began with them being held aloft and then thrown down a series of stairs of this huge temple. And I knew that was the inciting incident, and I knew cut forwards why they were at starting location that they were at and what bound me to want to do something with the group. And that was to assassinate another member of the group.
Yep. We'll get to that a little bit later on.
Cliffhanger.
Because that was your sabotaging moment, if I remember rightly. One of 200 that Farrow did. So I think if we pop back from that, I'm just going to get rid of Farrow for a little bit. But having something as simple as one thing in the backstory, and one thing of knowing why you're here in the present, allowed you to kind of to root down into something. Farrow being a rogue assassin. And you said before about kind of finding things that you are not. I mean, this is also interesting because it's one of your first D&D characters as well. You did a Pathfinder before that as well, which we might have a little time to chat about later. But with him, there was a certain playfulness that I know that you wanted to have a look at. Some sort of chaotic craziness. Because Farrow was one of those types of characters that as soon as you started, exactly as you say, as soon as you started, bang, we were into something.
Mm.
And I think it was episode 2 that this particular incident happened in. And you actually, we're going to jump straight to that question. So you literally turned around, you pointed a finger. No, you turned around, you decided you wanted a secret meeting with with a thieves guild, and which I gave you, of course I did. And then you turned
Yep.
around and you said, "I found him, the chosen one."
Yep. I love
uh,
how these tales of me playing D&D team to come back to me as if it's like when I'm drunk and 16. It's like, oh, do you remember when you did that? And I go, did I do that? Really? No, I do remember that. Yeah, that was me deciding that I was going to turn up and murder Josh's character.
yep.
Well, you're supposed to turn up with reasons why you know each other, so I thought it'd be great to come in and murder Josh. Uh, but then it gave, for my character, gave this wonderful little bit of tension in the background where obviously you need to get close to him. So
Hmm.
then you're going to be drawn to be near. And then once you are near, you realize that because there are other people there, then you just taking them off and murdering them is not the greatest idea.
No.
You want to get close. You want to be able to have some deniability. You want to be able to say that you cared. And then that's where the human crux of the character comes in. So they, because of their past, they have basically decided that they just don't give a fuck. Like they don't care. They're there for gold. They're there for prowess. They're there to be able to re-earn their name to a degree.
Hmm.
So those are the driving forces. Those are the things that they've turned up for. But it's actually inside of that adventure, what they've found are, I mean, for want of a better term, because obviously human is not the correct descriptor, but their humanity begins to be discovered by spending time with other people.
Yeah.
And that was so much the character arc for Farrow in that respect is, can I put them in a dangerous and stupid enough situation to try and reveal the character's humanity?
So, I mean, this is something that I've really enjoyed that you do now, and I've sort of pulled it into my own games as well, which is taking what you said about the dream sequence, and then you moved it into this idea of montage sequence.
Mm.
Um, which, if anyone runs a game, I highly recommend doing this. So, we were playing Dragon Heist,
Hmm.
and you were running Dragon Heist for us, and you brought in a theme song, which was from Robot Chicken, um,
It
which
was
is
from so I just want to Cowboy Bebop actually.
that's the
So
one.
it's Tank. It's
Yeah.
the opening theme from Cowboy Bebop. I have struggled to put any good theme songs up against that because it is
Yeah.
the best opener in the world.
Hmm. So you had that track, and then you would give us about 30 seconds,
Hmm.
15 seconds to kind of explain something of the past, the present, or the future
Mm.
of our characters or wishes of our characters. And so what we all got to see was these brooding background secrets
Mm.
being revealed in a tiny segment week by week, meaning that we could start piecing them together to understand each other's characters a little bit more, and
Yeah.
also allow us to kind of almost start giving us the license as a player to begin to action those things,
Mm.
because it no longer became a secret between us as players. It now became like, hey, we can actually, yeah, sure, I'm going to try and I don't know, open a portal to Thay and bring an army in, like it, because the players already knew that.
Mm.
So now we can start to play it. Um, and
Yeah.
I've now kind of an instruction I give to my players now is put it on the table.
Mm.
I mean, we were talking to Rob a couple of weeks ago.
I saw that and it was really beautifully, eloquently put by him because that
Mm,
is from what I was hearing because I had no idea about his character before watching the sort of the stream, and to hear how cold and calculating that character is as another player, I could imagine that's difficult. But the way that Rob tells it in such a human way, of course they need some sort of like flag to pick it up, and I thought it was really, yeah, really elegant the way that he approached it.
yeah, and this idea of he came to me and was like, oh, I've got all this stuff, and it's like, put it on the table. Let's get it on the table. If we can't put
Mm.
it on the table, then it doesn't exist. So I kind of totally agree with you. And taking that kind of instance when you turn around and you told the thieves called to assassinate this person, which ultimately the rest of the party managed to kind of get them off and
Mm.
save them
Yeah.
before they got taken away. It then meant we had this kind of creation of distrust
Yes.
between on Farrow, and Farrow then had to kind of push forward with this thing. So it created a new type of drama
Mm.
by doing something which is brave, to a better word of it. So when you kind
And
of
also
make
stupid.
yeah, and also stupid, but this also looks
Really
to my
stupid, because you get ejected from groups sometimes you doing that sort of stuff. Like, it
oh
can go wrong.
absolutely it can
Yeah.
go really really wrong. But luckily we were a really inexperienced group, and this is the first time we played with each other, so it kind of worked. But that kind of leads me on to a question about how do you make your choices in role play.
Mm.
I think I spoke a little bit earlier about us being in theatre, and that's usually quite instinctual. So I'm wondering, when you're role playing, is there any sort of, do you instantly go for the idea which is least or furthest away from you, or what you know is sensible, or is there something more to that you kind of consider when you role play?
I think it's very different depending on how that formed character has happened. So with Farrow, there was I knew what they wanted, and therefore pretty much every decision kind of rolled from that. They didn't care. They didn't care what people think of them, and they were there to try and achieve certain things, and those certain things were gold, prestige, and redemption.
Hmm.
And so everything else kind of fitted quite neatly into that. And also, when you are chaotic, if you're comfortable with playing chaotic and not upsetting other players, and you can, it's the balance of it is so tricky, because if you do that balance wrong, you will be rejected,
Yeah.
and rightly so, because it's disruptive play. Playing chaos is probably the most fun, but it is the most dangerous line to walk, I think. A straight out good character, everyone knows that they can be relied upon. Anyone who has a form of flaw that slows the group down or puts them in jeopardy, they can be a very difficult person to spend time with. And I'm aware with a lot of the characters that I play, they do take reckless choices, but they are grounded in reality. And
Hmm.
actually, that arc of redemption is so important. And actually, the bond that it builds and the drama that plays out, it's just really fascinating. So with that, for example, like that's Farrow had a relatively sort of baked in sort of backstory, and the decisions became relatively easily. With Errant, who was in Aftermath. Um,
Let's look at
when
her.
I began with her, she I'd written out a backstory which was more than I'd ever done. I'd established quite a lot of what it is that I wanted to say, where she'd come from, the areas that she'd grown up in. It's the first time I'd stared at a map. I'd Googled a map of D&D and was like, right, she came from there. Um, so I knew who her mother was, what was going on in her life, and I'd written this sort of aspect of the genesis of who she went on to become. And then we played through the campaign, and as we were building towards the story, she died in campaign. So just as we were literally the session, we went out to fight some gnolls. Just the session before we went, there was this moment where everyone was sat down in a group, and we all said, "Oh, and we were sharing stories." And she began to open up, and I think it was Tom's character. The two of them had grown very close, and Tom's character could kind of see a protege in her, and leaned forwards, and like there was that moment where we knew that the truth and the trust was about to be formed, but it
Mm.
wasn't just yet. And then literally the next thing we went out, like, combat went badly, character's dead. All the backstory, all the things that we'd written and sort of worked towards stopped. And then what happened is that she was buried, and the emotion and the difficulty that came with that, and as a player letting go of it, was really fascinating. It was really beautiful. And when characters die in D&D, I'm a traditionalist of, you should tear up the sheets. They are gone. They are dead. Um, and which is in part, like, I know some of the guys who were in that campaign watch this, so I'm happy to talk about her, but I can't. There's a specific thing or a specific couple of things in the backstory that I don't ever want to reveal,
Hmm.
because we never got there. So I'm never going to speak about them. And now that I've said that, I can reveal stuff, because they will assume that there was always something there, or was there. Anyway, but to come back to that idea of like decisions, when what I found with Erin was, because she had this big backstory, she had something to hide. She was being pursued by something, let's say, and her decisions were much harder for me as a player. And I struggled to make her active. She was still very present. She would still do battle. She would still have conversations with everyone, but she felt like she was carrying around some sort of secret that did hamper how she would respond to things. She didn't throw herself into the fray. And once she died, I was like, okay, let's roll another character. And this was Letton Fair, who was a big Irish um, killer of the undead. He was a man who journeyed through the undercrust, tearing skulls a twain, And he was absolutely superb. He had no backstory whatsoever. He literally turned up. They came across him in the campaign, and he was like, "You're right, lads," and then literally stuck around with them because they were interesting.
Yeah.
And they would constantly be like, "Are you going to come and fight this incredible evil?" Well, you're right. I've got a holiday, so may as well tag along. But because he was so casual about it all,
Yeah.
because he just didn't like it for him, it was about having a crack, turning up, doing something, fighting. He then became entrenched with the guys and became an interesting and interesting counterpoint to that. And then his backstory started to come out because of the humanity of playing with them. I then started making choices about, okay, well, what would be interesting to tell this group happened to him, rather than here's what happened to him. Now I'm going to tell you. We played, and then some of the choices that I got from that, I was like, and here's the backstory that I'm going to create.
Hmm.
And some of it came out, some of it didn't. But like his ultimate fear was being buried alive, which was for a man who spends his entire life spelunking to kill the undead. He's that fear for him, and it ended up in some of the games that we were playing, and it ended up in some of the adventures that we had when we went underground, for example. So it can be so variable. It can be your player choices can be. I think a lot of them do come from in the moment. What's the best story I could tell?
Yeah.
The single best. What's that? And then it's very instinctual, but it's only instinctual if you've got that grounding in a backstory, or you don't care and you're going to make choices as you go, and you're free to do it, and you can evolve and adapt it. And I think people should try to just to challenge themselves, try to evolve and adapt it as it goes.
Yeah, I think there is a certain sense of like, there's a scene. Yeah, it's a scene. Something has to happen in the scene. Do you see what I mean? And it's like, for me, I think that you have to have a little bit of craziness. Like, you have to, every single scene you should be seeing as the crux of the story.
True that.
Possible crux.
Mm.
Epicness. You know, like, there was actually, this is something that Farrow did when you weren't there.
Oh,
Which,
we're going to bring this up, are we, Joe? We're going to bring this up.
yeah.
The weirdest thing that I've ever had happen in a campaign. Um, okay, I need to. I'm just going to do a small bit from
Oh,
me, and then
actually,
I'll pass it back to you. Go
should
on.
we actually talk about Farrow? Let's do that first. Let's
Okay, fine.
describe Farrow for us. Like, talk to us about describe Farrow.
Farrow was a gnome. I mean, impish seems the wrong word, but Farrow was out for themselves. They cared about gold and very little else. But they had this backstory where they had been rejected and dejected from their home. They had been physically carried out as a result of the shame that they had experienced. And one of the binding moments, talking about binding moments as we were previously, that happened in the group was, and this was a difficult one to play. And I think we as a group of players have never shied away from difficult subject matter, but it has to be handled so delicately. And I will say that the context was very present, and it was very meaningful at the time, at the same time as it was very delicately handled. But Farrow had been a victim of physical abuse at that point, and the reveal of that to the other characters was actually the thing that made them understand their perspective, rather than being something that's ancillary and just useful. They've got a couple of scars. It's actually here's the deepness of a wound that they will physically wear for their life, and to them cannot be stepped past. For so many others, it could, but for them, they cannot walk away from that shame. But also, they throw ball bearings at children. So like, that's what that character is like. They're vindictive, and they're especially in the beginning they were a vindictive and difficult little bastard. And then as they got to know the other players, that the level of their character and humanity developed,
Mm.
and they learned so much more about themselves and moved past the things that had existed before then.
They're also expert gymnasts when drunk.
True, actually. That's a very good point. Yeah, I'd forgotten
It's,
about that.
it's something that became famous from town to town was, oh, you're the gnome that does the somersaults. Um,
Oh, because I got incredibly drunk and did I do a somersault competition
mhm.
or yes, I think it was. Yeah.
And that was like
Yeah, I did.
episode one or something stupid.
I think so. I think I critted on a roll
That's
for
it.
dexterity or something. And then you were like, well, seeing as you critted, people will be talking about this from town to town. And seriously, you had people turning up being like, hey, you're the guy who does somersaults, aren't you? Which for a rogue, you don't want to be known like that. But Pharaoh was fine with it. Infamy is better for him. He's good.
Because actually, Farrow went from 1 to level 10, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Through as an assassin, and you kind of got through to coming from a thief, so you were kicked out of the Thieves Guild originally,
Hmm.
and then
Correct.
becoming part of an Assassin's Guild.
Mm.
But what I'm going to talk about this a little bit later was all the things that happened around Farrow that you never found out. There
What?
was, yeah, there's so much stuff that happened while you were
Really?
down. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about some of this, Jed. Let's air some of this dirty laundry. Come on, then.
Yeah. So this whole kind of story of this gnome, he was always helpful to the people around them. Helped a small child and
Mm.
recruited and gave a job to a kid in one of the towns.
Yeah.
Which then began to spread of this idea of this charitable gnome as rumour changed from place to place. And what I was going to do is when you came out of the Princess Apocalypse, you'd come out to everybody expecting you to give them money because you were so charitable and so wonderful. And
Farrow would
literally,
hate
his infamy, it turned him into this wonderful, like beautiful community figure, no matter where
that.
he
Oh,
goes.
wow.
And I was like, that is the only way that Farrow could end his days is penniless, because he's had to give it all away in order to keep face.
I mean, considering the arc, mate, that 100% lands. The early Farrow would never have done that. The
No,
later Farrow, I mean, there was a point where I think you were trying to get a character to sort of, we'd approach the first town in Princes, and you had some young kids walk up to us, and they were being a bit bolshy, like, we want to play, we're part of the Foxes. And I was like, nah,
you
ball
still
bearing to the
remember it. Ball
face.
bearing.
Ball bearing to the face. So I ball bearing them to the face, and then the rest of the party stepped in to be like, I'm really sorry, this guy is not okay. And then you had that follow you got revenge on me much later on because you had them turn up and they didn't trust me and they remembered that I'd done that and I was like, oh man. And then I couldn't be a part of the Foxes and I was like, ugh. And I know that that tiny incident, because it sat with me, would have sat with Farrow.
Yeah,
um it's one of those things of like, you make a terrible choice and the terrible choice comes back to haunt you, and the truth of the matter there is they probably did spend their later life giving away their riches to people.
mm,
And I think they'd probably by that point as well come to terms with who they were and the idea of the lost in the world, the idea of those who didn't have a home, who didn't like. I could 100% see that. I think that
yeah.
would definitely be the case.
I mean, how did like Farrow change when you spoke about kind of great choices? But when you
Mm,
wrote Farrow down on a piece of paper for the character
yep.
sheet, and when you spoke their first line in the game,
Yeah.
like how much had changed in your understanding from when you created them to when you played them?
Well, their arc was purely that they were there to kill Josh's character, and we would find out what would happen after that.
Oh, and
And
just
and
by the way, just to players, make sure you talk to your DM about these particular choices. Just saying.
don't talk to your DM, and then you can come on a show like this and air your dirty laundry. Um, uh, I think so that the arc for me was it went as far as that. The overarching like aim. I know we can talk about objective and super objective, which I think has been mentioned previously on the cast, but it's super objective, the thing that your character ultimately wants. Objective, the thing that your character is seeking that will help them towards their super objective. Um, Forgive me if that definition's wrong. It's been a long time since I studied that. Um, so their objective was literally to get in, kill Josh's character, and then try and sort out that super objective, try and sort out that redemption and that, and sort out that arc. What actually happened was that they found their sense of humanity by spending time with. They didn't want to kill Josh. They didn't want to kill anyone else in the party. And then, more importantly, what happened with that is they became involved in a larger world, a world bigger than them that started to matter to them, because through the conduit of other players and other characters, they kind of started to regain a sense of themselves and their place in the world and why other people mattered. They started that redemption arc to the point where I think the closest connection for that was probably to Liam Fleming's character Nowhere.
Nowhere,
Um,
yeah.
Nowhere hated Farrow. Um, Liam and I, we have a relationship where we tease and make fun of each other to a degree, but a lot of deep-seated love there. And it was interesting when this stuff came out in the play. Sometimes we would find moments where his Nowhere would reject Farrow after this whole plot had been revealed. Nowhere rejected Farrow and wouldn't allow them to travel in their horns as they went from one location to another. They wouldn't allow them to sleep near them in a bed, and literally like sort of physically rejected them in that respect. And I think that was probably like, if I think about one of the sort of strongest relationships that came out of that, there were so many, but that one between Farrow and Nowhere, I think, was one of the ones that still sits with me to this day, is the arc of them overcoming that. I think there was a point when Farrow as a character, was it when we were cleaning out the water, what's the name of the evil water people?
The crashing wave.
Crashing Wave, that's the one. So I think it was either just before or just after we defeated the Crashing Wave, and you gave us a moment after battle or pre-battle to sit and consider what was about to happen. And there was so much on the line for Dev's character. There was so much on the line for all of us, knowing that we were either going into or coming out of it. Sorry, that I can't remember which it was. But I remember Farrow climbing a tower and sitting up there for a number of hours and actively making a decision at that point that they were in, no matter what happened from here onwards, that redemption arc was going to be completed for them and not for their status, what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the moment that you guys were up against a dragon turtle,
Oh my God.
in the crushing wave, and then the crushing wave essentially saved you and dragged you out to see, which result ended up being Dev's character's father.
Yes.
So that became quite interesting because Dev's character became like thinking themselves as the messiah to the water cult. And unfortunately, there was a TPK and we wiped all of you guys out. But there was a moment before it was like you were being forced to go to the air cult, I think it was,
Yes.
to clear
God,
them out.
yeah.
And you all sat at a table feeling shit. And then there was NPC after NPC that was coming up, just ripping it out of you constantly. Yeah. And there was this moment where Farrow kind of like put their knife down onto the table and was like, I'm gonna fucking kill them. And Nowhere was like, no,
yeah,
you must
steal your blade.
Yeah, steal your blade, relax, calm down. You know, and that became the part with both of you, of like one would be the moral compass for the other almost.
That's so true. Yeah.
You know, and also, you mean, in the end, Erden died. Josh's character you tried to kill. When they died, it's also Farrow was the one that gathered the stones and to bury them and to I mean, and it was again that idea of funeral and regret of this was somebody you learned to really love in the end. I mean, of course, Farrow did a lot of different interesting things, but what would you say is one of your favorite moments that you think you affected the story in a massive way? Not the attempted assassination of Josh's character.
I don't know, mate.
If you can remember.
I know very early on there was a lot of like Farrow was sort of driving a few different bits and pieces, and I certainly felt like while they did their redemption arc, they needed to pull back to a degree. And I think probably for me that aspect of it's actually not. I don't think it's a single moment. It's actually the development of that. It's of them being shunned. I think the revealing of the physical abuse that they had suffered was a really strong moment for me. Um, yeah, there's a few different aspects to it. I don't think I can pinpoint one in particular.
I mean, I think Liam's just sort of popped on the chat. Actually,
Hey, I'm sure he's correcting me on something.
No, he said a deep love between Farrow and Nowhere in the end. We definitely went back and forth between who was having a rough time, and they looked out for each other. Ugh. But I think for me, there was one moment, again, I didn't manage to speak about this earlier, but when you weren't there, I think you were busy on something.
I'd gotten pulled away to a meeting that I couldn't make. Is this what you're talking about when they went and did probably the most heinous crime against a tribe that I've ever heard of?
Well, it was against the Feathergale Knights.
Oh yeah, they're evil. Oh, they're evil.
Yeah, they're evil.
Yeah, sure.
And essentially they went and did a manticore thing, and then the Feathergale Knights were like, well, we're gonna like kill this lame vulture. And that was just like, nah, yeah, that's exactly the one, Liam. Yep, chandelier leap. And essentially the guys then went on this rampage of killing everybody in this tower. But they got into the fight, the original fight, and they struggled to kind of. So I just keep seeing things come up from Liam, and he's just. And essentially they started losing the battle. Now you had gone away.
Yeah.
So essentially,
So
what had
I think
happened is Farrow,
the classic thing
Farrow,
there is you put someone to sleep. Their character disappears off to go and do something, which is what you did.
yeah, they went out to have a party.
Yeah.
So they jumped on a
Orgy.
vulture.
Orgy was the word.
Orgy, yes, the one. They went and had an orgy. So essentially, he jumped on the back of a vulture with one of the Feathergale Knights, and they went off to town to have an orgy. So
Yep.
then, in the middle of this battle, which is like I don't know, 20 hours later, they're
Mm.
losing the battle, and then essentially the wonderful moment of this flying naked, butt naked gnome
Yep.
jumps from the chandelier to do the killing blow with a sneak attack that you critted. And you took out this kind of crazy wizard folk.
Mm.
And you kind of managed to murder everybody and turn the tide for the rest of the guys to completely like massacre the rest of this place. They took faces off. They
They took
piled them.
faces off.
Yes,
You
they
leave
did.
for a session, you come back, and they've taken faces.
Taking
They
faces, they
piled the
piled.
bodies up and burned them. Like there was some serious Viking bullshit that took place that session.
Yep. And they also locked the doors as well, and they burnt the
Yeah.
whole thing to the ground, which
Well,
had
it was because they hurt animals. That was the reasoning, which is the most vegan approach to things. I know.
and now Liam's just reminding us that was Josh.
Yeah, it was Josh. Yeah,
So you should have
Josh.
killed him.
Josh did
You
that.
should have killed Josh. That's what we're coming to,
I
isn't it?
kind of think that's what should have happened. But I remember coming back from the session, and you were like, and you butt naked, you you leaped over the chandelier, or I think it was along those sorts of lines. And then
Oh,
just hearing, because for so long after that campaign, we continued playing, and every game afterwards, people would be like, "Did you hear what happened at the tower about all the people's faces?" Because of course, rightfully, they've literally cut a schism in the universe, so everyone's going to mention it. And I was like, Jesus, that's the last time I ever don't make a D&D session.
but also you had a little gift. You had a little gift somewhere.
Oh, I did. Yes, that's true. I had a locket that I stored in my butt. Yeah.
And that game became the butt locket stayed for a while, and I think you continue to keep it in your butt as well. I think.
He didn't have anywhere else to store gold, and he cares about gold, so he stored it in the only place that you can,
You're
in your
so
butt.
good.
I would do
So
the same.
good.
I would do the same.
And I think not Aaron, sorry, Farrow
Mm.
kind of continued in that kind of gold thirsty vein. Um,
Yeah.
it got you a bit in trouble as always.
True.
And it's always a fun one to play with. Is that idea? Hang on, I got another one. Yes, you did go along with it, Liam. You are not uncountable for this one, Liam. You did
Absolute
do
rubbish,
that.
Liam.
Yeah, you did do that thing. So that was kind of one of a crazy moment that you never did.
Yeah.
That did make a big difference in the world, a big change. It changed a
Mm.
lot. I also think I also remember you turning up and finding a note which kind of busted open the world, which was quite an interesting one.
Oh God, yeah, you gave me a beautiful gift with that,
Um,
which basically allowed us to understand how to be able to enter and then access all of the interconnected big bad evils.
One of my favorite moments was meeting a black dragon, an ancient black dragon, and the black dragon looks over at Farrow and he's like, "Do you want some gold?"
Of course he wanted the bloody gold.
Want some gold? Would you like
Did he
some
not?
gold? Do you want to touch the
Yes.
gold? Do you want to touch the
Yes.
gold? And literally,
Yes.
and it was like the description John gave was Farrow stands and you can see his feet itching to go forward. His teeth are clenched as his hands are closing into his pockets, screaming internally, "Do not touch the gold."
Yep, that's about right.
So, so Farry's a very special character, who died as well.
Yes, who did die? I know. I'm still kind of.
That close to the end as well. You know, so
It
close.
was that. I know. Yeah, it was a. It was one of those weird things. I think, much like I think the death of Aaron, it felt. Although to be fair, I remember we were getting on the lift going down, as in characters, not as in us as players chatting in a lift. As players, we're getting into this lift, and I was like, guys, we've really not thought this through. This is a terrible idea. And when we went through and got pounded, I got our asses rightly handed to us. I do remember thinking, well, that's fair enough.
Because
Like, we
literally,
didn't do what we needed to do.
no, I remember you guys stopped at a level,
Mm,
and I was like, the platform stops. And you were looking out, and Josh was like, Josh's character, who was got really interested in the elemental eye and stuff like this, was like, yeah,
yeah.
we should get off here. And everyone went, nah,
Nah.
let's go down further.
Let's
And
go
you,
and kick this thing's ass. Oh.
and you
Oh, my
went,
character of 3 years is dead.
and you went down into, I think it was the fire, like literally like the center of the
Mm,
fire elemental's power, which was
mm.
this kind of big lava lake. And you got really like, cool, let's go and do this. And I think you got onto the shoreline before a fire giant destroyed you guys.
We did. We did manage to reach the shoreline. I think I seem to remember. I think it was either Malthus or Liam's character Nowhere going around and doing a lot of healing just to try and get us over the line to get there. And then it was like one hit wonders from that point onwards.
Yeah.
Down. And you know as well, you know when your party is in trouble when you hear, I'm down and I'm on death saves. I'm down and I'm on death saves. I'm down and I'm on death saves. You're like, uh-oh, we're not coming out of this, are we? This is going to TPK us.
Yep.
I love TPK though. They're so exciting.
Well, the thing is you already you got rid of one god
Mhm.
already, hadn't you, by this point?
Yes, we have.
So the idea that, I mean, it's slightly different to the module is that it was like we decided to play this kind of idea of fanaticism with Dev's character. So it was like wipe out all of the other cults, wipe them out. So it meant that you guys had to go up against every single prince. Um, so you had the fire one that was there. You just had to do this one, and then we could have opened up the big arc and done the last bit. So you guys were very, very close, and you had to kind of make new characters to kind of come in, which is where
Mm,
we unfortunately had stopped from that point on. But I think the something that I've definitely taken from Farrow is that idea of take stupid, ridiculous, scene bending or scene changing decisions
mm.
to kind of go through. Because otherwise, what's the point?
You're there to play a hero, and that can be an anti-hero sometimes, but
Yeah,
you have to be careful with how you do it.
yeah. And I get to talk about with Liam, with
Mm,
Nowhere was a great one. Where he kept playing this idea of got really evil, and
mm,
essentially had fallen into this kind of slightly more warlocky sort of area that we talked about. And he was like, "Oh yeah," and he decided to make a joke. So, "Oh yeah, fireball the family." And I was like, "All right, roll dice." And it became a thing then of like, okay, do you feel like you want to do something awful?
yeah.
And they would go, yes. And go, right, let's roll the dice and see if you do it. And that progression became really interesting of a monk who turns into warlock, who kind of gets drunk on power and then returns back to monk.
Mm.
Um, and becomes much more solid. And actually, Farrow was quite instrumental in actually seeing them change quite heavily and going, "Fuck it, you changed."
I think they
Yeah,
were the first to put a drink in their hand,
yeah.
and then to get addicted to booze for a while. Because Liam, I seem to remember Liam having to do particular roles to be able to see whether or not he was going to either drink or how sober he was going to stay and how in control.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
nowhere I think she didn't drink. And there was
mm,
particular reasons for that, and Liam had made these kind of ideas of like using wisdoms and using different saves in order to see if they drink or not. Um, and that kind of bold choice is what can really not only create absolute wonderful drama, but can kind of sabotage the DM in such a beautiful way that
yeah.
is an invitation to continue playing in the world, an
Mm.
invitation to continue playing within the story, and to go, hey, Mr. DM, have another knife.
Well,
Please stab me with it.
we're while we're speaking about this, I have to. So my first campaign that I ever ran, Dragon Heist, Joe was one of our players, um, along with Stu, who you've met previously, and Ben and Tom. And I remember this is the first like bit of D&D I'd ever run in my life. You guys sabotaged me so hard I had to think on the fly because do you remember this? I was like, you've got to go and you've got to get this thing from inside the coffin. We're going to bury him tomorrow. And I was like, come up with a plan. I was like, it's a heist. I'm going to make this really heisty. They'll come up with a plan. I'll thwart it because they'll tell me their plan because I'm there and I'm present in the DM. That'll be great. I remember you guys putting your plan out, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this is the best plan I've ever heard of. You guys were so good at coming up with it. I didn't know what the hell to do to get past it. I was like, they're just going to walk all over this module. They're literally going to walk all over this. I don't know how to deal with it. So I remember going, okay, let's take a quick break. And I walked outside, and I think I was quite silent for a bit. And you guys were like, you all right? It's like, yeah. Just thinking about how to deal with this. It's like, how can I make robbing a coffin harder and more adventurous than it is in the module? And then I remembered that I have thought about some enormous wheels. So the idea that the coffin was connected to a set of enormous wheels, so it would go like 90 foot into the, and that's a tradition in Waterdeep. That's a tradition in Waterdeep. So we all went round and we came up with traditions that would happen at a funeral procession, and then I think you guys were ready. You'd come up with this brilliant plan to rob the coffin, and the coffin turns up and it goes 90 foot in the air every 15 seconds. So it's like, okay, that's how I sabotage my players back. Is sometimes you don't just need to raise the stats of like monsters that they're up against. Sometimes you just dynamically change the way in which they're screwing with you. When your players come in, you could just be like, right, okay, I could just make some giant wheels. There we go. That's made this. And I think it made the session so much more hilarious and like interesting as a result. But I definitely remember as a DM, that was definitely some time that you and the other players sabotaged me.
Oh, I did sabotage ya.
That's what the players always say.
No, but I think I remember a moment that I did sabotage you in that, which was just literally turning up with Albus. Just generally, Albus was fucking evil.
Absolutely beautiful. I think
Evil.
you're the only player that I've seen that is like that will happily split the party. Be like, no, I'm just gonna go off and do this. You were like, yeah, no, I'm not interested in that. But it did lead to some of the most interesting scenes because you ended up being incredibly diplomatic. So you'd go around as a dignitary and visit all of these people. And there was a group of essentially there was a group of people that you visited, NPC wise, they were like forever young,
Yeah.
but they were all decaying. So they were incredibly young and beautiful, but they were all decaying. So they'd start having a conversation, and then their tongue might drop out of their mouth, and they'd put it back in again, or their jaw would dislocate and then pop back in. But they were so young and youthful and stunning and energetic. And I just remember, like, yeah, there were a lot of aspects that just aren't in the campaign. That if you hadn't then gone, I'm just going to go off and do this, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as interesting.
But also just being able to turn up there and go, yes, of course, yes. Yeah, we want 30,000 35 gold pieces of manacles to go to Thay, please.
Yeah.
And you going, manacles? And I'm going, yes, it's a continual trading route that we need to continue with. And everyone going, fucking hell, Albus is dealing in slaves. What the fuck is going on? And like Albus was truly nasty. Still looking forward to continue playing with Albus though.
Can't wait to finish that campaign. I mean, that one's been about 2 years in the running. Yes, we got towards the end, and then we still need to just finish off that last bit. And I cannot do that. The end of the Dragon Heist module is rubbish.
Is it?
It's awful. It's so bad. Can I just rinse this thing for 2 seconds? So what they've done is, again, spoilers for Dragon Heist.
Spoilers.
If you care about, then don't carry on watching for a bit. We'll move on shortly. So what they've done is like it's a heist. There's nothing heisty about it. It's just a little bit of a battle, and it's not even that hard. It's pretty easy. Actually, if anyone is looking to play Dragon Heist, there is a resource, the Alexandrian.net, I want to say. Oh my God, that guy went through and repaired everything that Wizards of the Coast didn't do properly. At the same time, it's invented some extraordinary systems. So he's got like he has this thing for dynamic movement in buildings and across buildingscapes, so that if you enter at a particular time, you know who's here, where they are, and also when certain things happen, how they'll move rooms and run away. So he plots all of this so that you as the DM can be like, you understand the entire way that a battle should play out in that environment space. And I was like, this guy he is absurd. He's so good. If you're able to do links in the doobly doo at some point, Joe, like I
Hmm.
will send you the details for
Oh,
this guy's
please
website
do.
because it's so good.
See, I was using Sly Flourish when for
Hmm,
this because he does the same, and there's loads of great resources out there. If you go to DM's Guild as well, there's
mhm.
some fantastic PDFs of like side missions, you know, like gangs of Waterdeep style like things you can do in the background, especially in chapter 2 where you're literally just here's your mana, do
Oh,
stuff.
the rooftop chase. I mean, what is that?
Hmm.
It's a massive bag of shite.
So, Wizard Coast, if you do enjoy our stream,
I'm really sorry. Wizards of the Coast, you do loads of things really well, but some of it is either just not for the people that are, it's not for everyone, and then other times it's just shit.
okay. So you were going to say something, but then I'm going to ask for one last statement for you because we do actually have to finish in a bit.
Oh no. Okay.
I
Um,
know.
I can't remember the thing I was going to say is.
Great.
Oh,
So,
that's a lot.
so my big thing is what I'm going to call you a. It's not. This is not a bad term. This is actually something that I think is a good thing. Which is a lazy player, a lazy character creator,
Yep, fair.
um, or a reactive. Let's use the word reactive. It's much more
No, you can
positive.
call me lazy as well. I am a lazy player. I'm well aware of that. I don't read the rules. I do expect other people to help me out because
Okay.
I'm not 100% certain of how to deal with things, and I apologize for it.
No, no, no,
But
no,
I,
no,
I
no,
do
no, no.
play
That's
it
what I
every
mean.
day.
So let's use the word reactive because I think that actually shows actually what you do. You're a reactive player,
Sure.
and I think that is a style of player. So as a reactive player, what is your kind of your top tip for kind of playing in that style?
Hmm.
It's a difficult one, I know, but you know, something that you will go, hey, if you don't want to kind of create all this stuff, if you don't want to have to do this way, what is the kind of the top tip you can have?
I think it's being in your own head and improvising stuff or playing D&D is pretty natural. What? Someone said something in the chat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's Stuart.
Oh, of
Just
course it is. Okay, we'll come back to whatever Stuart said in a second or two because I know he's going to be rinsing me right now.
no, just
Good.
he's just placing that idea of lazy player just a little bit more.
Come on, tell me what Stu said, and then
He
I'll
literally
give
just
you the
said
correct.
lazy player.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, Stu, I'm coming for you. So yes, I think it's really easy to get inside your own head. It's really easy to try and make decisions because you think they're the most interesting for your character. It's it's hard to just respond to something and then know that you've made the right choice. But it comes being irresponsible comes with learning to be irresponsible. I know that sounds ridiculous, but the stupid choices that I make after I've made them, I try not to think about them too much. And I try to make sure that they're not going to upset, offend, or push too hard at anyone else at the table. And that's a really fine line. And you're going to make mistakes doing it. And there are players who are out there to min max. There are players that are out there to try and achieve very similar things who can't forgive themselves or can't move past it and who don't. I think you have to make mistakes to improvise and to get to those points. Forgive yourself for doing them and communicate to the other players around you. And for God's sake, if you're going to do those sorts of things, Christ, make it fun.
Hmm.
Because if it's miserable, and don't get me wrong, I love a bit of grimdark. I love some hardness. I love having hard conversations around the table and dealing with them in a responsible way. But if you can't, you're going to make mistakes doing that. Forgive yourself for it, move past it, but make sure that you've checked in with all of the other players that are around you. I don't know if that completely answers the question, but I think
I
it
think that's
for
yeah,
me at least it's kind of the ethos of where I'm trying to get when I turn up as a player. No
yeah,
one's
no,
going to play with me now. They're all going to be like, "There's this edge lord, John, John Cooper, Lord Edgelord."
yeah. You blacklisted from
Yeah,
everything now.
Blacklist. Roll 20 will know. I'll log on. They'll be like,
Yep.
"We saw the interview, John."
But I also think that like there's a big thing of that, which is understand there are consequences,
Totally.
but revel in those on the possibilities of those consequences.
Make brave choices. Most people, I think, in life, you don't get to make as many brave choices as you want to. In D&D, you should be making them every 10 minutes.
Yeah, every 10 minutes. Stupid choices, regrettable choices all the time.
Totally, totally.
Well, you have been a dear. You have.
Oh, you.
Oh, you.
You! Oh, thank you so much, Jigsaw. Thank you so much for having me on. It's
Oh,
been such
mate.
a pleasure.
It's been wonderful. And again, I would love to have you come back and run another game on this channel. It would be so, so good. But
Really hankering. I've missed DMing, so I really
uh,
do want to.
as long as I can
Mhm.
play.
Yeah, would you play?
Yeah, I'll play.
Okay, that would be amazing.
All right.
That'd be so. Okay, cool. You're in.
Handshake.
Done.
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 But I am going to say, yeah, I think you're absolutely true. It's a dream having a player as good as an improv as John is. Reactively, definitely is the right way to describe it. I will call him lazy though. Ha ha ha.
Well, that's
That's
Stu.
from Stuart. Yes.
My heart
Beautiful.
breakers.
I know. Breakers, it does. Um, but before I go, I just want to kind of say thank you for everybody who's joined us. If you missed at the beginning, we have just recently become affiliates. So if you do want to support us, please hit the subscribe button on your Twitch. And of course, if you got your Amazon Primes, get Jeff to give us money. So it'd be wonderful to see you next week. I'm going to be talking to one of my favorite evil character players. Mr. Joel Samuels is going to be coming on to talk
Amazing.
about a character that I destroyed for him, and another character that is worshipping fear. So please join us next week for a bit of evil chat. But other than that, as usual, I would just like to say continue playing games, continue playing role-playing games, and of course, stay safe. Unless you want to make a stupid decision and make every scene wonderful. See you later. Bye.